Hello, everyone. Welcome to this chat. My name is Gautam Chuggani. I cover crypto at Bernstein. I have with me Kwon, the founder of the Terra ecosystem. Kwon, welcome. Just for the new, anyone new here, why don't we just start with a brief introduction about the ecosystem, and then we'll kind of get into more interesting questions.
Sure. So Terra is a layer 1 blockchain that is centered around its decentralized stablecoins. And we have a suite of stablecoins that cover the US dollar, the Korean won, the Thai baht, and multiple different fiat currencies. There's about 20 or maybe a little bit more than 20 different types of fiat Terra supported. And then the goal is to create a DeFi ecosystem on top of these stablecoins, such that the money that we've created is easier to spend and more attractive to hold compared to other types of centralized money, such as fiat currency or centralized stablecoins. So currently, there's a number of different applications that are running on top of the Terra blockchain, from the savings protocol Anchor, whereby you can earn a stable, attractive interest rate on a Terra USD, to Mirror Protocol, which allows users to invest in any type of asset across the world, be it synthetic equities, commodities, and other types of cryptocurrencies, as well as a full suite of different applications that are being built out by third parties, such as Levana Protocol for perpetual futures, to Mars Protocol for easy lending across the interchain, and so on and so forth.
Great. So, let's start with a very basic question, right? Why did you start with stablecoins first? What was the rationale of sort of building a decentralized stablecoin ecosystem? And obviously, I asked this in the context of that you have a kind of real world application, which is a payments, application in Korea. So just tell us the rationale around that.
Sure. So what was striking to me when I was first starting out in crypto was there's a ton of teams that are focusing on building interesting apps on top of crypto on Ethereum, and there's another set of teams that are building that are server technologies, so which is new blockchains. But what was sort of striking to me was there were very few people that were trying to build better currencies using blockchain technology, and that means how can you create different types of currencies that hold their purchasing power relative to whatever the fiat currency might be in the respective jurisdictions. So I felt that in order to build a vibrant ecosystem of financial applications, you need to have money on blockchains. And to me, that was the decentralized stablecoin.
Interesting. And, the other part about it is also the fact that you've been very outward focused, right? So you always, it's, obviously everyone looks at DeFi and sort of thinks of it as very insular, which sort of everyone kind of yield farming within the kind of crypto ecosystem. The base use case has been speculation in some ways. You've been very outward looking, right? So for example, the payments ecosystem or any of that. How does that vision of being outward focused, almost like wanting to build a fintech business, but obviously powered by DeFi, how does that sort of universe converge in your mind?
Sure. So so to put it one way, if you build something that is geared inwards to a DeFi audience, you can grow very quickly. So you can get to billions of dollars in TVL. There's going to be a lot of money flowing through your ecosystem. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really grow the pot, right? So you might get to billions of dollars in TVL, but for 99% of DeFi apps, it doesn't last, because if there's like the next shiny new thing coming along, those dollars tend to shift from your ecosystem to something else. So in some sense, like in order for something to be sustainable over the long term, you need to make sure that you're providing value outside of pure speculation. So, and those things are sort of focusing on the fundamental features of money. And if you sort of view money as like a very simple product, it only has a couple of features, right? Number one is spending. So you can take money and use it to either buy things or invest in some products. or you can use it, you can hold it. So these are things like savings or different types of passive investment strategies. And those are the things that we're focused on because those are the things that are going to last.
And when you kind of look at this real world adoption, right, what do you think is the killer app which sort of starts onboarding people, right? So obviously there are multiple things out there, but what is that sort of, you need one pull factor. What do you think that is?
Yeah, and in my mind, it's really closing the loop of building out some of these key features in money. So, I think in the beginning, it starts out with savings. So people need to be comfortable, custodying or holding their household savings in an instrument that they believe on a risk-adjusted basis is going to give you higher returns than, let's say, what a commercial bank is willing to give you or other opportunities in DeFi are going to give you. And for us, that answer is Anchor Protocol, because right now, Anchor is giving users a 19.5% yield on holding Terra USD. So that sort of blows out any other opportunity on both the stability and the attractiveness out of the water. And I think the second component is once you feel comfortable enough, holding household savings, so your store of value in something like Anchor Protocol. So the other thing that you need to build is that people need to be able to spend it, and these are retail payments. So, for example, in Korea, we have something called Chai, which is an e-wallet that is being used by close to 3 million people to buy anything from, let's say, something in their local convenience store to the largest bookstore, movie theater, general purpose e-commerce, online groceries, and so on and so forth. So only by closing the loop on the use cases of money, we feel like you can create an ecosystem that can be competitive with what fiat currencies are able to offer.
And, when you kind of look at every market, right, both savings as well as payments, both of which you described, you see kind of not just like banks, right, but you see, for example, in Korea, we see Kakao, and Kakao Bank recently went IPO. And in every market, you have these super apps kind of offering those kind of investment products and things like that. And, given that you have a mainstream app out there in the market, how is it to compete with those kind of fintech kind of players versus to kind of bring real world adoption? And related to that is also like fiat onboarding. So, for example, to start taking deposits and to start the kind of, versus just like moving money within crypto, how is that sort of thing also kind of evolving in your view?
Sure. So the jury's still out, given these things are still quite early. But I think the main competitive advantage is that if you look at most of the things in fintech, I sort of call them candy wrappers. And the reason why I call it that is because the underlying products are the same. And the only innovation that's happening is on the UI layer. So, they might come with a couple of different buttons or different marketing material or things like that. But largely the things you can do with things like Square Cash and, Venmo and, Toss in Korea, they're all the same. And that's because, in order to truly innovate financial products, you need to go a layer deeper into innovating the base layer money itself. So, for example, if you take payments, for instance, some of the biggest pain points is that on the settlement layer, things are highly inefficient. So in order for a merchant to be settled in digital payments, it often takes several days for them to get their money that the customers have already paid. And generally, there's a lot of rent seekers in the payment settlement process. So, the transaction fees on most payments across the world is 3% or above. So this isn't good. And if you switch out the base settlement layer into something that is more efficient and trustless, you can fix both of those things. So, for example, like if you build a payment app on top of Terra, or let's say on top of any valid stablecoin infrastructure, some of the things that you're able to do is that number one, because you don't include those middlemen in the settlement process, you can drastically cut down on fees. And number two, given that you can settle directly to the merchant, you can cut down on settlement times. So, for example, from a matter of 7 days to the average block time of the Terra blockchain, which is 6 seconds.
When I look at your ecosystem, I find it very fascinating because you literally have the full stack, right? You have a savings app, you have savings in the form of Anchor, you have a payments app, you have obviously a kind of a front end as well in the form of Alice. And then obviously you have stock trading, which is like a Robinhood. And literally, and then obviously every country you have a stable coin, right? So for example, the Thai baht and so on and so forth. And I think that's the kind of long-term vision. So literally you could take a Terra module or your ecosystem module and apply it in that whole stack in every country locally. Because I mean, come to think of it, right? Like obviously you in the DeFi world, you literally have competitors which are, so the usual Ethereum competitors who are doing yield, who are doing stock trading, which is a great space, and obviously you want to kind of capture market there. But at the same time, that having one full stack within one ecosystem is extremely powerful, right? And to kind of implement that in almost region by region, country by country, right? Is that sort of like you think that's where sort of you're headed?
Yeah, but I would say the key distinction is that if you have an open ecosystem, turns out there are lots of developers across the world that believe in your vision and are willing to do those things so that you don't have to. So for example, now, especially after Anchor Protocol came out, there's a ton of wallets being developed in multiple jurisdictions that offer a very simple premise. So users can hold their money in this wallet and then earn a high attractive yield, and then they can spend it using Terra's payment modules, either using debit cards or direct merchant acquisition and onboarding to buy anything that they want. So for example, there's Catapults in Scandinavia, there's Take Money in Australia, there's Astro Money in Europe and the UK, Alice in the United States, Chai in Korea. So there's multiple different efforts across multiple different jurisdictions, whereby the premise of a neobank that offers users real yields is catching on all across the world.
Yeah, so literally you're like a new banking stack, right? Where every decentralized team in different countries could take that and sort of implement that locally with local onboarding and sort of so on and so forth, right? Yeah, I think the other question I had was, as you kind of cut through your sort of, the different protocols you've launched, particularly Mirror and other things, what's been the adoption like? I mean, could you share something there?
Sure. So for payments, if you take Chai, for instance, is doing northwards of $1 billion in transaction volume per year. There's about 2.7 million active users that are transacting, buying anything from general purpose e-commerce to essentially anything that they want in the country. That's been going pretty well. Mirror Protocol, for instance, there's about $2 billion worth of TVL locked up in the protocol, providing liquidity to creating mirrored assets and so on and so forth. Anchor Protocol has about $1.2 billion in TVL, and respectively, I think for both of those apps, it's gone down a little bit after the markets came down. But at the peak, Mirror was seeing about 150,000 monthly active users, and for Anchor, it's about 120,000 monthly active.
I mean, it's interesting that everyone measures these things by TVL, but it ends up being dominated by a few whales. But the fact that you're thinking in monthly active users is very interesting.
I think there's some validity to looking at TVL because it's directly correlated with how deep the liquidity is going to be and how useful each platform is. But I think the correct methodology of looking at it is by looking at it by usership. Right? And it might not be, as attractive from a financial perspective, but I think having lots of users is powerful because, Metcalfe's law, right? If you have tons of users that are generating value through your protocol, it's more likely that it's going to last for a longer period of time.
Yeah. I kind of go back to exchanges, right? Like, I think initially there were many exchanges with sort of very concentrated liquidity, but over a period of time, as the last 3-4 years, it's all been about onboarding millions and millions of users, right? So I think it's kind of very similar to what's going to happen in DeFi as well, with sort of the user traction going up. The other question everyone has is, when you look at your ecosystem, there are multiple projects and multiple coins, right? And then they kind of come back to that, create UST demand, which is your stable coin. And then that comes back to the Luna sort of core, the token economics. What's the rationale of having so many multiple projects, right? Why can't one token accrue value across all these projects? In some ways, like BNB does that, right? It does it at the Binance Smart Chain level, it's at the exchange level. but it's like one token where all value is kind of accrued, right? And that becomes a very powerful token economic model. So I was just wondering what's the curiosity? I was just curious around what's the rationale around that.
Sure. So I was actually, keeping this question out on Twitter just yesterday.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the way that I'm thinking about it is that if Luna was the one asset that was governing everything in the Terra ecosystem, it's going to do two things. Number one, it's going to make it very difficult for new developers to join the ecosystem because the first things that you do, the first apps that you stand up sort of sets a pattern as a reference app, right? So, for example, if all value is expected to accrue to Luna, and that you form a community expectation around that, then how do you sort of stand up your own communities and stand up your own protocols in the Terra ecosystem? And in some sense, it becomes very insular. So by sort of replacing the incumbents that we sort of identified problems in, we replace the old guard with ourselves. So in some sense, it doesn't really change the system. Second thing is, go ahead. Yeah, so I mean, the second thing is I sort of see this distinction between capitalism and communism, right? So if you, generally, our goal is to create a vibrant economy on top of Terra. So if you look at Terra, the main product is a stablecoin money, right? So in some sense, like when, the objectives of the Terra ecosystem is very similar to the objectives of a new developing country, right? Yeah. So in that sense, like you have a choice. Number one, you can drive everything by the state in a system whereby all the developers, all the innovators are not working for themselves, but is working for the state, which is one possible system that you can implement. Or another thing is you sort of encourage entrepreneurs and innovators and workers to create organizations that have selfish interests, and that's capitalism. And I think history has taught us that one system works better than the other, and that's the direction where we're headed.
And in this context, right? So a very simple way to look at it is all of this is creating USD demand. You are powering the economy with USD and other kind of adjacent stable coins. And then the value kind of comes back to Luna in some ways, right? So that's the kind of graphic I have sort of in my mind. But at the same time, right, when market goes through difficult periods, the Luna market cap fluctuates a lot. And at the same time, there are questions which are raised on stability of USD. How do you control for those periods, or how do you kind of, how do you feel comfortable yourself that the stable coin will remain kind of will function as required during abnormal times?
Yeah. So once again, I think the economics of how Terra and Luna are designed is very similar to the challenge of creating a new developing country. And similar to startups, it turns out that most developing countries actually fail in the sense that they never actually truly escape poverty. And
that's a good analogy.
And then if you look at currencies in most of these states, unless they peg themselves to the dollar, in FX markets, they generally tend to be very volatile, right? But what I do know is that over time, as we build more applications on top of the Terra ecosystem, and then the people that are transacting and saving using Terra monies grows, the number of those people grow, then a bet on Luna is going to get surer over time. Because similar to how as economies grow stronger, there's currencies grow stronger, right? And a lot of these sort of projects built on top of the Terra ecosystem are going to be counter-cyclical in their demand cycles. So, for example, like when the rest of the market crashes, like you can imagine a scenario where a lot of people want to custody their assets into Anchor, and that actually did happen after the Nate crash, with deposits in the Anchor protocol growing at about 67% month over month, right? But if imagine a world where there's like 60 different types of things like Anchor built on top of Terra. So I think that that's going to be more and more de-risked over time.
And while we're on this topic on stablecoins, let me just close it out with this regulation, right? So obviously, everyone talks about regulation for stablecoins, particularly. How do you think about it, and how do you kind of look to manage it?
Yeah. So the eventual goal of Terraform Labs is to get the Terra economy to such a state where developers can self-organize and create new constructs on top of it without centralized intervention. What that means is at a time where we feel like Terra stablecoins can maintain stability on their own without our help, that developers can come in and get onboarded without us holding their hands, Terraform Labs will eventually dissolve. Even now, we're already at a state where even if a regulator came knocking, sure, they could try to fine us or, to punish us for the things that we've already done. But there is nothing that we can actually do to shut down either the blockchain or the DeFi apps that we've built. Right? And eventually there will come a state where there's no centralized counterparty that people can even try to shut down or punish.
Yeah. And, while we are at this, right, in this whole topic of algorithmic stablecoins and under-collateralized stablecoins, how do you think about that whole spectrum, right? Obviously, there have been many experiments which have failed. Some of them have partly succeeded with fractional collateralization and so on and so forth. How do you see yourself play in that space, right? So sort of more stepping back to how the stablecoin design is going to evolve. Obviously Maker is the largest one within DeFi. Obviously a lot comes from USDC, which is more collateralized and more regulated. And then obviously there's this tail of lot of algorithmic stablecoins, right? And obviously you don't play there right as of now, but how do you see that whole space evolving?
Sure. So I think a lot of builders in DeFi are starting to realize that you can't build decentralized applications on top of centralized ones. So I think the first applications used Tether or USDC because there was no decentralized alternative. But if we talk to developers now, one of the reasons why so many are willing to work with Terra USD, despite the fact that it's about 20th the size of either USDC or even smaller than Tether, is because it's truly decentralized. And the thing is, if you build a decentralized financial stack on top of something that can be censored by just a handful of issuers or regulators, there's no point, right? Because you can hold the entire stack hostage by censoring the underlying base monies that the stack relies on. So I think over time, more and more of DeFi and the applications that are built on top of the crypto stack are going to constitute, are going to reconstitute around decentralized stablecoins. And our goal is to make sure that Terra USD leads that charge.
Right. Cutting over to a very different topic, which is around interoperability and scalability. One of the things that obviously been very discussed with now multiple blockchains emerging. You obviously operate on your own sort of blockchain ecosystem. How do you think about, obviously Ethereum is the largest source of liquidity. It has its challenges and sort of trade-offs, but how do you think about operating with other chains in that? And then maybe after that, we can talk about scalability in your own context.
Sure. So, most stablecoins operate using the same sort of interchange strategy. So for Tether, Circle, Terra USD, they all aim to be on as many blockchains as possible. So we're sort of agnostic to what type of blockchain that our money happens to be running on. Right? We're only mainly concerned with trying to get these sort of monetary constructs into as many applications and as many chains as possible. So already Terra USD operates across Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum, Polygon, and Solana, and we'll come to as many blockchains as we can build decentralized bridges for. And you can sort of think about these as foreign exports, right? So for example, like the U.S. government has no qualms about allowing foreign governments or foreign corporations to hold the U.S. dollar, and I think the same incentives apply to decentralized stablecoins as well.
Right, and then the applications themselves will still reside within your sort of blockchain.
So there's a bunch of applications across other blockchains that use Terra USD. So, for example, there's Saber, which is like a new AMM that launched on top of Solana. There's DeFi on Polygon. There's PancakeSwap on Binance Smart Chain, Uniswap, Balancer, and some others. on the Ethereum ecosystem. So I would say it's growing quickly.
Got it. So it's more that UST ports onto other chains rather than the specific applications that you're building. And then sort of there are multiple decentralized applications that start using UST.
Right.
And then, this whole question around scalability, obviously you're based on Cosmos. How do you see that, if you want to get to these few 100,000 users to millions of users, how do you kind of see that scalability play out for yourself?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So the Cosmos stack, Cosmos is a project that is mainly centered around interoperability. So there is this inter-blockchain communication standard called IBC, and IBC is often marketed as a way that allows blockchains to connect, but it could very easily be applied as a scaling solution. So, for example, you can build applications on various different Cosmos chains, and then you can connect to them as if they all reside in one blockchain using sort of a smart contract execution layer called Cosmos. So, for example, when you're writing a Cosmos smart contract, all you need to do in order to call a smart contract from a different chain is to specify the chain ID and the contract ID of the application that you want to interact with, and it executes similar as if they all reside on one blockchain. So essentially what this sort of replicates is sort of a sharding system, except each of these shards are self-branded Cosmos zones. So for example, there could be, let's say, an osmosis zone. There could be, let's say, a cashnet zone. And then the execution layer that sits on top of all of them can call smart contracts in any of the others. For us, in order to scale Terra, and by the way, like just with the blockchain that we have, we think there's a lot of bandwidth left to spare, is we can create, let's say, Terra Zone 1, or let's say Terra Anchor Zone and Terra Mirror Zone, and then create smart contracts on any of them as if they all reside on one blockchain.
Interesting, right? And it's, we end up discussing Solana and Ethereum so much on scalability that we've almost never really focused as much on Cosmos and what's happening in that whole space, right? For the audience, right? What should they expect in the next few months, or more sort of medium term kind of horizon from the ecosystem?
Yeah, so you can think about like Anchor and Mirror as sort of reference apps on the Terra system, similar to how there were these reference apps on the iPhone when it first came out. So the new applications that are going to launch on top of Terra are going to make the existing applications much more useful. So, for example, by connecting mirror synthetic assets with, let's say, lending markets on Mars, you're going to be able to see situations where users simply hold, or from their perspective, simply holding, let's say, mirrored Apple and earning a 10% interest on it, which they'll never be able to do with traditional equities. You'll be able to see a situation where there are tons of different neobanks that are retail-facing in multiple different jurisdictions, thereby increasing exposure and accessibility. You're going to see applications that tap into Anchor Yield to programmatically direct it to lots of interesting use cases. So for example, Angel Protocol, which allows you to simply deposit stablecoins, and then the resultant yield is used to fund charities of your choice. So I think it's going to be a very exciting time for the Terra ecosystem, and can't wait to see what happens next.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. I think we've touched the 30-minute mark, but Doug, absolutely fascinating to talk to you, and good luck. And I think from whatever you just described, it sounds very exciting. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.